We'll be speaking to a former England captain, Michael Atherton, in just a moment. But first, before we do so, let's just bring you a couple of quotes from an ECB statement after the news as we brought you that Chris Silverwood, the England head coach, has been sacked. This from the ECB chief executive, Tom Harrison, who says that during his time in the role, Chris has given absolutely everything to make a success of it. He has led the England men's team with great resilience and empathy through an incredibly challenging period for English cricket, and he deserves our sincere thanks and gratitude. And this is key. In the coming days, Andrew Strauss will appoint a caretaker coach for the tour of the West Indies and will then consider the appropriate coaching structures to help England move forwards. And from Chris Silverwood himself, we've heard from him in this statement. He said this: "It's been an absolute honour to be England head coach. I'm extremely proud to have worked alongside our players and staff. I want to thank them for all the hard work and commitment they have given during my time in the role, and I wish them all the best moving forward. The last 2 years have been very demanding, but I've really enjoyed my time with the team and working with Joe Root and Earl Morgan, and I'm very proud of this group considering the challenges. I leave with fond memories, and I'm now looking forward to spending some quality time at home with my family and embracing the next chapter." Let's get some more immediate reaction then. Michael Atherton joins us live right now. Thank you for speaking to us this evening on this breaking story, Michael. I mean, ultimately, does it feel like it was inevitable that Chris Silverwood would depart, as he now has?
Yeah, there was a high degree of expectation that he was going to go after a bad Ashes series and a poor year for England's Test team. There was a recommendation, I think, for an overhaul of the management and leadership of the team. That started yesterday with Ashley Giles and continues today with Chris Silverwood. I think there's an expectation that they want Joe Root to continue as Test captain, but clearly, after the year England have had and the Ashes series that had just been concluded, they couldn't go on with no change, and therefore, you know, they've made two big changes, and that will allow them to continue with Root as Test captain, I imagine.
Well, we spoke to Mark Ramprakash a few moments ago. He mentioned that it was ultimately not just the scoreline, the 4-0 defeat in Australia, but that a lot of things didn't sit right, to do with tactics, to do with selection. Was there any one factor that you think dictated this decision more than any other, Michael?
No, I think it was a culmination of things. You're right that you can't just judge on results. If you have one team that is of far lower quality than another team in Test cricket over 5 days, the stronger team will always come out. So you cannot just judge captains, coaches, cricketers on pure results. But what you hope is that good leadership can get a team playing to its potential and its capability, or slightly beyond. And it's clear that England weren't doing that. And the gap between England and Australia in the Ashes was wider than it should have been. England made Australia look a better side than they were. So any number of factors. You can talk about selection in the first test, the second test especially at Adelaide. Some of the selections continuing after that, some of the strategy out in the field. So a combination of factors, really. But broadly, England's Test team stagnating over a period of time. One win in 14, four series lost on the bounce. And, you know, when Ashley Giles gave Chris Silverwood the added powers of selection, which he did back in April, he said he wanted clear lines of accountability. Once you go down that route, it sounds all very neat and tidy. The problem is that you'll end up in a football-style situation where a poor run of results leads to major upheaval every time. So it's not an ideal situation, but slightly brought upon themselves by the structure that was put in place. And I suspect that structure will change going forward.
You mentioned major upheaval. We've seen Ashley Giles go yesterday. We've seen Chris Silverwood go today, Michael. Would you expect any other departures, or is that just simply too disruptive? And you do need some of the kind of senior figures in the current setup to continue for the time being, at least.
Well, I think there was a feeling after the Ashes that there needed to be an overhaul of the team. I don't know how deep that will go, whether, you know, anybody else will be held accountable for it. That's impossible to say. But clearly those are big changes that England have made. Director of Cricket, who's responsible for all the cricketing decisions and strategy. And then the head coach who was responsible for coaching across formats and selection. So those are the two key figures, along with the captain, obviously, or captains in England's case, because they split it between red ball and white ball. So those, the two changes that they've made are big changes. And the people, whoever they bring in permanently in due course, will clearly have a major influence over things going forward. But you'd expect, without talking about people, you'd expect structures to change. I would find it amazing if one man is able to do everything that was loaded upon Chris Silverwood's shoulders, which is coaching across 3 formats with all responsibility for selection. I think no matter how capable an individual you are, that is an incredible burden and workload to shoulder, and I think almost impossible.
You mentioned maybe not talking about specific people, but of course the question will inevitably be raised, where does this leave Joe Root? What would you say your read is on his situation right now, Michael?
Well, I think they expect him to continue. The kind of pragmatic reality is that there are fewer alternatives to Joe Root's position than there are in terms of coaching or directors of cricket, where you can source those jobs from all over the world. Clearly, captain of England, you can't. And there are limited alternatives to Joe Root. So Joe was party to many of the decisions and the strategy that has cost Ashley Giles and Chris Silverwood their jobs. But there are bluntly fewer alternatives to his job than there are to the other 2. And that's the kind of pragmatic reality.
I'll just repeat one of the quotes from Tom Harrison, ECB Chief Executive, who said this: in the coming days, Andrew Strauss will appoint a caretaker coach for the tour of the West Indies and will then consider the appropriate coaching structures to help England move forward. Does that sound like a sensible first step to you, Michael? Yeah,
the Tour of the Caribbean is a relatively short one. It's 3 test matches, basically in March. And then there's quite a long gap until England play test cricket again. I don't think they play test match again until June. I'd have to check the fixture list, but it'll be midsummer sometime. So that's quite a lot of breathing space there for decisions to be made. Obviously, there are big decisions to be made, whether you split the jobs and go down a red ball, white ball coaching structure, give to the 2 separate teams 2 completely distinct coaching teams. That's one big decision to make. And then obviously on personnel, who do you bring in to do that? Those decisions take a bit of time. They're not easy decisions to make. You have to go through processes. So I suspect there'll be interim positions, as the statement said, for the Caribbean tour in March, and then time to make some longer term decisions after that.
So Chris Silverwood has gone. In terms of replacement or replacements, who do you think the ECB should be targeting?
I mean, you can pluck any number of names, out of a hat. I have no idea who would be favourite to take the job. There's an intriguing situation going on down under right now, where it seems like Justin Langer's position is hanging by a thread, bizarrely, to us, having just won the World Cup and the Ashes. He may become available. There's other people down there like Andrew McDonald, the assistant coach, is very highly regarded. No doubt many names within the English game as well. What tends to happen, a little bit like the football team, you tend to lurch from one extreme to the other. So England have often gone in search of foreign-born coaches or foreign-produced coaches when their English counterparts have kind of been cut short, as Chris Silverwood has been here and Peter Moores was twice before him. So whether England will go down that route, again, I don't know. But if you split the roles, as I expect they will do, you do broaden the talent pool. Somebody like, say, Mahela Jayawardene, who's highly regarded. If you fancied him for, say, white ball cricket, you've more of a chance of getting a candidate like that if you split the jobs, because the time on the road is less than it would be in Silverwood's case, where he's doing it across formats. Now, that, given the schedules these days, that is a very high consideration for a lot of these coaches who now are going down. A lot of the better candidates are going down the franchise route because it's less time on the road. So by splitting the role, you do broaden the potential talent pool there to pick from.
OK, well, we'll see what moves England do decide to make. As we mentioned, caretaker coach for the Tour of the West Indies and then a permanent appointment after that. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky Sports News this evening.
OK, cheers.
James Cole is back on set with us. So let's talk about next steps, immediate next steps and ultimately changes maybe further afield with England. So what do you expect to happen? What sorts of things need to change?
So Andrew Strauss is now acting director of men's cricket. He has not got long to find this interim coach for the West Indies, because they fly to the West Indies, the Test team, on February the 24th, and they're supposed to be announcing a squad for that tour next week. So you're talking really short timeframes here. The candidates potentially for that interim role, Paul Collingwood, who's already with the team as an assistant coach. He led the team for the T20 series that we've just had in the West Indies. He'd be a probably very quick appointment and an easy appointment. He'd know the players, he'd know the setup. That would be relatively straightforward. Other names being mentioned, Alex Stewart is in the frame, apparently, we're hearing. He's been linked with it. And also Richard Dawson, he's the England under-19s coach. He's in the Caribbean, so again, he's in place there. They've got their World Cup final, haven't they? So those would be Dawson and Collingwood, probably the most likely in terms of logistically. And then the first test gets underway March the 8th in the Caribbean. As Michael Atherton said then, there is then a gap. It's New Zealand in June is the next test cricket. And now you're looking for potentially a red ball coach and a white ball coach long term. As Michael touched upon, that opens up different avenues, because you might have for the white ball coaching role, you've got someone like Mahela Jayawardene, who's being tipped. But then for the red ball coach, you could go down the road of perhaps Justin Langer. He's reportedly in the frame. His contract with Australia is up later this year. There's reports of not a rift, but not exactly the greatest relationship with Australia at the moment. The reports that he would have to reapply for his job, which Cricket Australia then denied. So you've got names like that. You've got Mickey Arthur, the former Australia, South Africa, Pakistan, Sri Lanka coach, but he's just taken a role at Derbyshire. And then you've got Gary Kirsten, who's already thrown his hat into the ring for the job, having applied for it in 2015, 2019. So it's pretty complex, but as Michael said there, by having a white and red ball split, you are opening your options, and you are offering a more appealing role, because that coach won't have to travel so much. And that was probably one of the burdens that we've seen with Chris Silverwood, particularly in the pandemic. Worth mentioning, though, as well, then England, the ECB, aren't just looking for a new director of cricket, a new head coach, red and white ball, a new interim head coach. They're also looking for a new chairman. So there is a lot of instability at the moment at the ECB, and there's a lot of work to be done. The one man who remains in place, who's going to organise all this, Chief Executive Tom Harrison.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, Sir Andrew Strauss in this sort of interim role, there's a lot in his intro too. When you look at the context of the last, let's say, 7 years, England's exit from the 2015 World Cup, and then their shift to white ball cricket, and really the focus that was applied there, and then, of course, the rewards that came in 2019. How important is it, what they're looking at in terms of structures, existing structures, for their shift back onto red ball cricket?
Yeah, absolutely. They're looking at the county championship, because that's where it starts and ends. The criticism there, the pitches aren't good enough. It's played in the wrong time of the year. It's put at the early summer, late summer, where the conditions aren't great. You've got the 100, huge emphasis on the 100, the IPL. The problem is, the lure financially is white ball cricket, and the players, they want IPL contracts. That's what pays. The 100, that pays well. Test cricket, if you're going to create elite players in red ball, the county championship, it's got to be more lucrative. There's got to be more pull, hasn't there? And one argument is that you reduce the number of teams in the county championship. Well, the 18 counties need to vote for that. So if you're going to reduce the number of teams in the county championship, they'd have to pass it. I can't see the counties doing that. And that's been, when that was put recently to the ECB, they suggested that it didn't need to be reduced, the number of teams, there just needed to be fewer games. So whether that happens, I don't know. But yeah, they're looking at a complete overhaul of the red ball structure. It's all part of the process. It's part of Andrew Strauss's remit now as well, going forward. But there's no quick fix.
Yeah. Upheaval, overhaul. The tectonic plates appear to be shifting in English cricket, don't they? Thank you very much indeed, James, for that context around this breaking story.